Gormenghast. Chapter 7. But he was not destined to more than a few moments of relaxation, for feet were soon to be heard outside his window. Only two of them, it was true, but there was something in the weight and deliberation of the tread that reminded him of an army moving in perfect unison, a dread and measured sound. The rain had quietened, and the sound of each foot as it struck the ground was alarmingly clear. Prunesqualler could recognize that portentous gait among a million. But in the silence of the evening his mind flew to the phantom army it awakened in his leap-frogging brain. What was there in the clockwork stepping of an upright host to contract the throat and bring, as does the thought of a sliced lemon, that sharp astringency to throat and jaw? Why do the tears begin to gather, and the heart to thud? He had no time to ponder the matter now, so at one and the same time he tossed a mop of grey thatch from his brow and an army on the march from his mind. Reaching the door before his bell could clang the servants into redundance, he opened it, and to the massive figure who was about to whack the door with her fist, "I welcome you, your ladyship," he said. His body inclined itself a little from the hips, and his teeth flashed, while he wondered what, in the name of all that was heterodox, the Countess thought she was doing in visiting her physician at this time of night. She visited nobody, by day or night. That was one of the things about her. Nevertheless, here she was. "Hold your horses!" Her voice was heavy, but not loud. One of Dr. Prunesqualler's eyebrows shot to the top of his forehead. It was a peculiar remark to be greeted with. It might have been supposed that he was about to embrace her. The very notion appalled him. But when she said, "You can come in now," not only did his other eyebrow fly up his forehead, but it set its counterpart a-tremble with the speed of its uprush. To be told he could come in now, when he was already inside, was weird enough, but the idea of being given permission to enter his own house by a guest was grotesque. The slow, heavy, quiet authority in the voice made the situation even more embarrassing. She had entered his hall. "I wish to see you," she said, but her eyes were on the door which Prunesqualler was closing. When it had barely 6 inches to go before the night was locked out and the latch had clicked, "Hold!" she said, in a rather deeper tone. "Hold hard!" And then, with her big lips pursed like a child's, she gave breath to a long whistle of peculiar sweetness, a tender and forlorn note to escape from so ponderous a being. The doctor, as he turned to her, was a picture of perplexed inquiry, though his teeth were still shining gaily. But as he turned, something caught the corner of his eye, something white, something that moved. Between the space left by the all but closed door and very close to the ground, Dr. Prunesqualler saw a face as round as a hunter's moon, as soft as fur. And this was no wonder, for it was a face of fur, peculiarly blanched in the dim light of the hall. No sooner had the doctor reacted to this face than another took its place, and close upon it, silent as death, came a third, a fourth, a fifth. In single file there slid into the hall, so close upon each other's tails that they might have been a continuous entity, her ladyship's white clouder. Prunesqualler, feeling a little dizzy, watched the undulating stream flow past his feet as he stood with his hand on the doorknob. Would they never end? He had watched them for over 2 minutes. He turned to the Countess. She stood in coiling froth like a lighthouse. By the dim glow of the hall lamp, her red hair threw out a sullen light. Prunesqualler was perfectly happy again. But what had irked him was not the cats, but the obscure commands of the Countess. Their meaning was now self-evident, and yet how peculiar to have enjoined a swarm of cats to hold their horses. The very thought of it got hold of his eyebrows again, which had lowered themselves reluctantly while he waited for his chance to close the door, and they had leapt up his forehead as though a pistol had been cracked and a prize awaited the fastest. "We're all here," said the Countess. Prunesqualler turned to the door and saw that the stream had indeed run dry. He shut the door. "Well, well, well, well," he trilled, standing on his toes and fluttering his hands, as though he were about to take off like a fairy. "How delightful, how very, very delightful that you should call, your ladyship. God bless my ascetic soul, if you haven't whipped the old hermit out of his introspection. And here, as you put it, you all are. There is no doubt about that, is there? What a party we will have! Musical chairs and all!" The almost unbearable pitch of his laughter created an absolute stillness in the hall. The cats, sitting bolt upright, had their round eyes fixed on him. "But I keep you waiting," he cried. "Waiting in my outer rooms. Are you a mere valetudinarian, my dear ladyship, or some prolific mendicant whose bewitched offspring she hopes I can return to human shape? Of course you are not, by all that's evident, so why would you be left in the cold? This damp, this obnoxious hell of a hall, with the rain pouring off you in positive waterfalls. And so, if you allow me to lead on." He waved a long, thin, delicate arm with as white a hand on the end of it, which fluttered like a silk flag. "I'll throw a few doors open, light a lamp or two, flick away a few crumbs in readiness for... what wine shall it be?" He began to tread his way to the sitting-room with a curious flicking movement of the feet. The Countess followed him. The servants had cleared the table of the supper dishes, and the room had been left with so serene a composure about it that it was hard to believe that it was but a short while ago in this same room that Irma had disgraced herself. Prunesqualler flung wide the door of the sitting-room for the Countess to pass through. He flung it with a spectacular abandon. It seemed to imply that if the door broke, or the hinges snapped, or a picture was jerked off the wall, what of it? This was his house. He could do what he liked with it. If he chose to jeopardize his belongings, that was his affair. This was an occasion when such meagre considerations would only enter the minds of the vulgar. The Countess advanced down the centre of the room and then stopped. She stared about her abstractedly, at the long, lemon-yellow curtain, the carved furniture, the deep green rug, the silver, the ceramics, the pale grey and white stripes of the wallpaper. Perhaps her mind reverted to her own candle-smelling, bird-filled, half-lit chaos of a bedroom, but there was no expression on her face. "Are all your rooms like this?" she muttered. She had just seated herself in a chair. "Well, let me see," said Prunesqualler. "No, not exactly, your ladyship, not exactly." "I suppose they're spotless. Is that it, eh?" I believe they are, yes. I quite believe they are. Not that I see more than 5 or 6 of them during the course of the year, but what with the servants flitting here and there with dusters and brooms and clanking their buckets and wringing things out, and what with my sister Erma flitting after them to see that the right things are wrong and the wrong things are right, I have no doubt that we are all but sterilized to extinction. No tartar on the balusters, not a microbe left to live its life in peace. I see, said the Countess. It was extraordinary how damning those 2 words sounded. But I have come to talk to you. For a moment she stared about her ruminatively. The cats, with not a whisker moving, were everywhere in the room. The mantelpiece was heraldic with them. The table was a solid block of whiteness. The couch was a snowdrift. The carpet was sown with eyes. Her ladyship's head, which always seemed far bigger than any human head had a right to be, was turned away from the doctor and down a little, so that her powerful throat was tautened, yet ample along the near side. Her profile was nearly hidden by her cheek. Her hair was built up, for the most part, into a series of red nests, and for the rest smouldered as it fell in snake-like coils to her shoulders, where it all but hissed. The doctor twirled about on his narrow feet and flung open a silkwood cabinet door with a grandiose flourish, bringing his long white hands together beneath his chin and tossing a mop of grey hair from his forehead. He flashed his brilliant teeth at the Countess, who was still presenting him with her shoulder and about 1/8 of her face, and then, with eyebrows raised, "Your ladyship," he said, "that you should decide to visit me and discuss some subject with me is an honour. But first, what will you drink?" The doctor, in flinging open the door of his cabinet, had revealed as rare and delicately chosen a group of wines as he had ever selected from his cellar. The Countess moved her great head through the air. "A jug of goat's milk, prune squalor, if you please," she said. What there was in the doctor that loved beauty, selectivity, delicacy, and excellence, and there was a good deal in him that responded to these abstractions, shrank up like the horn of a snail, and all but died. But his hand, which was poised in the air and was half-way to the trapped sunlight of a long-lost vineyard, merely fluttered to and fro, as though it was conducting some gnomic orchestra, while he turned about, apparently in full control of himself. He bowed, and his teeth flashed. Then he rang the bell, and when a face appeared at the door, "Have we a goat?" he said. "Come, my man, yes or no? Have we, or haven't we, a goat?" The man was positive that they had no such thing. "Then you will find one, if you please. You will find one immediately. It is wanted. That will do." The Countess had seated herself. Her feet were planted apart, and her heavy, freckled arms were along the sides of her chair. In the silence that followed, even Prune Squalor could think of nothing to say. The stillness was eventually broken by the voice of the Countess. "Why do you have knives sticking in your ceiling?" The doctor recrossed his legs and followed her impassive gaze, which was fixed on the long bread-knife that suddenly appeared to fill the room. A knife in the fender, on a pillow, or under a chair is one thing, but a knife surrounded by the blank white wasteland of a ceiling has no shred of covering, is as naked and blatant as a pig in a cathedral. But any subject was fruitful to the doctor. It was only the lack of material, a rare enough contingency in him, that he found appalling. "Ah, that knife, your ladyship," he said, giving the implement a glance of the deepest respect. bread knife though it be, has a history. A history, madam, it has indeed. He turned his eyes to his guest. She waited impassively. Humble, unromantic, ill-proportioned, crude as it looks, yet it means much to me. Indeed, madam, it is so, and I am no sentimentalist. And why? You will be asking yourself. Why? Let me tell you all. He clasped his hands together and raised his narrow and elegant shoulders. It was with that knife, your ladyship, that I performed my first successful operation. I was among mountains, huge, tufted things, full of character, but no charm. I was alone with my faithful mule. We were lost. The meteor flew overhead. What use was that to us? No use at all. It merely irritated us. For a moment it showed a track through the fever-dripping ferns. It was obviously the wrong one. It would only have taken us back to a morass we had just spent half a day struggling out of. What a sentence! What a vile sentence, your ladyship! Where was I? Yes! Plunged in darkness, miles from anywhere. What happened next? The strangest thing. Prodding my mule forward with my walking cane. I was riding the brute at the time. It suddenly gave a cry like a child and began to collapse under me. As it subsided, it turned its huge, hairy head, and what little light there was showed me its eyes were positively imploring me to free it from some agony or other. Now, agony is an agonizing thing to happen to anyone, your ladyship, but to locate the seat of the agony in a mule in the darkness of a mountainous and fever-dripping night is, not easy. Lightotis. But do something I must. It was already upon its side in the darkness. A great thing. I had leapt from the collapsing spine, and at once my faculties began to do their damnedest. The brute's eyes, still fixed on mine, were like lamps that were running out of oil. I put a couple of questions to myself. Pertinent ones, I felt at the time, and still do. And the first was, is the agony spiritual or physical? If the former, the darkness wouldn't matter, but the treatment would be tricky. If the latter, the darkness would be hell. But the problem was in my province. Oh, very nearly. I plumped for the latter, and more by good fortune, or that curious sixth sense one has when alone with a mule among tufted mountains, I found almost at once it to have been a happy guess. For directly I had decided to work on a carnal basis, I got hold of the mule's head, heaved it up, and swiveled it to such an angle that by the glow of its eyes I was able to illumine, faintly of course, but to illumine none the less, with a dull glow, the rest of its body. At once I was rewarded. It was a pure case of foreign body. Coiled, I couldn't tell you how many times, round the beast's hind leg was a python. Even at that ghastly and critical moment I could see what a beautiful thing it was. Far more beautiful than my old brute of a mule. But did it enter my head that I should transfer my allegiance to the reptile? No. After all, there is such a thing as loyalty as well as beauty. Besides, I hate walking, and the python would have taken some riding, your ladyship. The very saddling would tax a man's patience. And besides... The doctor glanced at his guest and immediately wished he hadn't. Taking out his silk handkerchief, he wiped his brow, then he flashed his teeth, and with somewhat less ebullience in his voice, "It was then that I thought of my bread knife," he added. For a moment there was silence, and then, as the doctor filled his lungs and was ready to continue,
"How old are you?"
said the Countess. But before Dr. Prunesqualler could readjust himself, there was a knock at the door, and the servant entered with a goat.
"Wrong sex, you idiot!"
As the Countess spoke, she rose heavily from her chair, and approaching the goat, she fondled its head with her big hands. It strained towards her on the rope leash and licked her arm.
"You amaze me," said the doctor to the servant. "No wonder you cook badly. Away, my man, away! Unearth yet another, and get the gender right for the love of mammals. Sometimes one wonders what kind of a world one is living in, by all things fundamental. One really does."
The servant disappeared.
"Prunesqualler,"
said the Countess, who had moved to the window and was staring out across the quadrangle.
"Madam?"
queried the doctor.
"I am not easy in my heart, Prunesqualler."
"Your heart, madam?"
"My heart and my mind."
She returned to her chair, where she seated herself again and laid her arms along the padded sides as before.
"In what way, your ladyship?"
Prunesqualler's voice had lost its facetious vapidity.
"There is mischief in the castle,"
she replied.
"Where it is, I do not know. But there is mischief."
She stared at the doctor.
"Mischief?"
he said at last.
"Some influence, do you mean? Some bad influence, madam?"
"I do not know for sure, but something has changed. My bones know it. There is someone."
"Someone?"
"An enemy. Whether ghost or human, I do not know, but an enemy. Do you understand?"
"I understand,"
said the doctor. Every vestige of his waggery had disappeared. He leaned forward.
"It is not a ghost," he said. "Ghosts have no itch for rebellion."
"Rebellion!"
said the Countess loudly.
"By whom?"
"I do not know. But what else can it be you sense, as you say, in your bones, madam?"
"Who would dare to rebel?"
she whispered, as though to herself.
"Who would dare?"
And then, after a pause,
"Have you your suspicions?"
"I have no proof, but I will watch for you. For, by the holy angels, since you have brought the matter up, there is evil abroad and no mistake."
"Worse,"
she replied.
"Worse than that. There is perfidy."
She drew a deep breath, and then, very slowly,
"And I will crush its life out. I will break it, not only for Titus's sake, and for his dead father's, but more for Gormenghast."
"You speak of your late husband, madam, the revered Lord Sepulchrave. Where are his remains, madam, if he is truly dead?"
"And more than that, man, more than that. What of the fire that warped his brilliant brain? What of that fire in which, but for that youth Steerpike—"
she lapsed into a thick silence.
"And what of the suicide of his sisters, and the disappearance of the chef on the same night as his lordship your husband? And all within a year, or little more, and since then 100 irregularities and strange affairs. What lies at the back of all this? By all that's visionary, madam, your heart has reason to be uneasy."
"And there is Titus,"
said the Countess.
"There is Titus,"
the doctor repeated, as quick as an echo.
"How old is he now?"
"He is nearly 8.
Prunesqualler raised his eyebrows.
"Have you not seen him?"
"From my window,"
said the Countess.
"when he rides along the south wall."
"You should be with him, your ladyship, now and then," said the doctor. "By all that's maternal, you really should see more of your son.
The Countess stared at the doctor, but what she might have replied was stunned forever by a rap at the door and the reappearance of the servant with a nanny goat.
"Let her go,"
said the Countess. The little white goat ran to her as though she were a magnet. She turned to Prunesqualler.
"Have you a jug?"
The doctor turned his head to the door.
"Fetch a jug,"
he said to the disappearing face.
"Prunesqualler,"
she said as she knelt down, a prodigious bulk in the lamplight, and stroked the sleek ears of the goat.
"I will not ask you on whom your suspicions lie. No, not yet. But I expect you to watch, Prunesqualler, to watch everything as I do. You must be all aware, Prunesqualler, every moment of the day. I expect to be informed of heterodoxy wherever it may be found. I have a kind of faith in you, man, a kind of faith in you. I don't know why,"
she added.
"Madam," said Prunesqualler, "I will be on tiptoe."
The servant came in with a jug and retired. The elegant curtains fluttered a little in the night air. The light of the lamp was golden in the room, glimmering on the porcelain bowls, on the squat cut-glass vases, and the tall cloisonné ware, on the vellum backs of books, and the glazed drawings that hung upon the walls. But its light was reflected most vividly from the countless small white faces of the motionless cats. Their whiteness blanched the room and chilled the mellow light. It was a scene that Prunesqualler never forgot. The Countess on her knees by the dying fire, the goat standing quietly while she milked it with an authority in the deft movements of her fingers that affected him strangely. Was this heavy, brusque, uncompromising Countess, whose maternal instincts were so shockingly absent, who had not spoken to Titus for a year, who was held in awe and even in fear by the populace, who was more a legend than a woman? Was this indeed she, with the half-smile of extraordinary tenderness on her wide lips? And then he remembered her voice again, when she had whispered,
"Who would dare to rebel? Who would dare?"
And then the full, ruthless organ chord of her throat.
"And I will crush its life out. I will break it, not only for Titus's sake,